right, well, BC has become the latest province to crack down on cells at school. Beginning in September, students will be forced to go phone-free from bell to bell, the start of school to the end of school. Here to discuss in more detail is clinical and school psychologist Todd Cunningham. Todd, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. All right, so I think what's on a lot of parents' minds, particularly in BC right now, is what does this mean? What does this plan entail come September?
Yeah, and I think we're still figuring this out. And the big piece here is really to think about what has the research told us about cell phones and how cell phones are impacting learning in the classroom. Now, we all know that the notifications and all that kind of grabs our attention for all of us. You know, there's a part of our brain that has automatic attention, and it clues us into important bits of information in our environments. Why we remember to check our stoves before we leave the room or the house, and why when we hear our names called, we attend to it. The problem is we've wired this part of our brain to think that our cell phones, the notification on that, is so important that even if it's on us, either on the table or in the student's knapsack, it's drawing their attention there. And a study in 2017 showed that it wasn't until the phone was physically in another room did the student's attention actually come back.
So even when the phone was on silent, if it was just near to them, the urge, the desire was there.
Right. Totally. And so what we're finding in the research at this point is that we need to really teach students that there's like this hygiene aspect of learning. Because when you're in the classroom, your attention is supposed to be on the teacher or on the work in front of you or the conversation that's happening within the room. And the cell phone disrupts all of those natural attention, natural learning environments that's happening.
Yeah, well, as you well know, I mean, this conversation has been going on at school boards right across the country. As a matter of fact, Ontario tried this several years ago, but they left the enforcement part of it up to individual schools or school boards. What do you think needs to happen there, Todd, when it comes to enforcement? How do you enforce something like a cell phone ban in the classroom?
Excellent question. And I think what we've learned is just giving it to the teacher is not the way to do it. We need to have a systematic structure, and there needs to be a conversation about this. I think one of the challenges is if one teacher says, hey, you can't use your cell phones in the classroom, the next teacher is okay with that. Suddenly students are kind of arguing back, pushing back. They are so tied to their cell phones that they want to use these things. And when a teacher says no, then they get defensive. So we need to have a policy, and we need to be able to talk about this. You know, does the phone get docked or stay in the locker? Does it get docked at the front of the class? In some jurisdictions, they have these special little pouches that they put their cell phones in. We need to kind of come up with a policy, and then we need to talk to the students about this. This is not punishing them, but there's a real science behind why they can't have the cell phones.
And the parents need to be on board, because you talk about different rules in different classrooms, and if you don't have that uniformity, that's a problem. But if the parents are not on board, that's a problem.
Yeah. And as I tell a lot of my parents who come into the clinic each day, you know, we all have to practice good cell phone hygiene. When you go home at night, everybody should be docking their cell phones at the front of the home as they go through the front door, because even during the dinner time, you don't want to be constantly being pulled away from attending to your kids, or as you're doing other activities in the house, you don't want to be constantly modeling checking your phones. We all need to be putting our phones away when we're having a different type of interaction. And I think one of the challenges has been, because some youth are spending around 20 hours a week on their phones, this is pulling away from other behaviors that they could be doing. So that normal human interaction conversation, for some, that's actually not being practiced as much, and therefore that skill's actually not being developed. We need to kind of pull back on this tool so that they can be able to have these more natural conversations.
Yeah. Todd, why has this been so contentious and so hard to implement, a cell phone ban? I mean, if we do have some research that says that this is taking away the kids' attention in the classroom, is it, I mean, there's an argument I know students have made that the cell phone, actually the smartphone, empowers learning. It helps them, they can look up things. Is that maybe one of the reasons why?
Definitely, but schools have other educational devices, computers and that they could also be accessing. It's nice to have this one device on them. But I think the biggest thing goes back to this sense of our brains are actually wired to want to check the devices. And when we take it away, we kind of get that little kind of itch on us, like, where is it? Well, why don't I have it? And so therefore they want to go back to it. COVID, while we were doing the lockdowns and all that, a lot of us moved to cell phones and social media as our main ways of communication. And by now saying, hey, we need to start to change that, we need to kind of get back to that in-person communication, I think that's taking some transition time for a lot of the youth who were brought up during this time of, cell phone was the key way that I talked to my friends.
And if we were to implement that change effectively, what do you think we would see almost immediately or over time?
Well, the research at the university showed that cell phone use and your grades actually have a correlation. So as you spend more time on the cell phone, your grades go down. So I think we'd actually see a returning, grades. School success could actually go up. And some jurisdictions in the U.S. have actually reported that as well. That, in fact, when they brought in these cell phone bans, they actually saw all students' grades begin to rise.
All right. Well, listen, a very, very interesting and contentious conversation for sure. Todd, really appreciate you coming in and breaking it down for us. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.